Newspapers. A window. At one point, our only window into the outside world. But in the blink of an eye, or the click of a mouse, those pages have turned. Meet Lynn Brantley, an award-winning journalist, as she talks about how the industry has changed in her experience of almost 30 years.
I am the editor of the Ohio County Times News. I started in the industry in 1994, and during almost 30 years I have actually worked writing for a newspaper for 25 of those years. The others I spent at a monthly magazine or writing for trade. The thing about working for a weekly newspaper is that the process is different depending on the week. Usually we start as soon as the newspaper goes to print for the previous week. So we start on that on Wednesday, kind of getting some ideas. I get some ideas of some different stories that I want to write, try to start setting up interviews. Then the rest of the week is spent trying to conduct interviews. I write a weekly column every week, so I try to get that done at the end of the week. And then on Monday mornings, that's usually when we have our staff meeting and really try to tie together how many pages we're going to have, that type of thing. And that's when we start actually doing the production part of the newspaper, which is laying it out. Our deadline to have everything on the press is actually 9 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, but we usually try to have everything pretty much ready to go by the time we leave on Tuesday, whatever time that might be. Well, when I first started at the newspaper, the internet was something that was just so new, and I didn't even really know anything about it. I had no idea what it was, and so technology didn't play a huge role in that. So that in and of itself has changed so much, because now everything is done on the computer. We don't actually sometimes don't even print the pages themselves at all. We will proof them on the screen. So it's never actually even printed until it goes onto the press and prints onto newsprint. That's been a huge change over the years. Also, we can a lot of times work remotely now. I don't think we realized just how much of an advantage that was until COVID. But that can be done when you have to be off-site and can't get to the office for whatever reason. So that's impacted that a lot. And I think the internet has played a really huge role in changing the way we put out a newspaper, because now we have access to emailing people when we can't get them on the phone. We have access to information that can help substantiate stories and facts and claims and things that we're trying to write about. So I think in the past 30 years, the internet has played a huge role in the actual production of the newspaper itself. Newspapers constantly changing. I think technology is going to always continue to change the industry as it continues to change. I hope that AI doesn't eventually take over to where it's writing stories and obituaries and we're not needed anymore. And I don't think that's ever going to happen. But I can see that people are going to rely a little bit more on technology for helping them craft their stories. But I think that the creativity that's needed to put out a newspaper is always going to rely solely on the person and on human beings. One of the ways that social media has really changed the landscape, if you will, of our newspapers is the fact that years ago we would have 3 to 4 pages in our paper of what we call society news. And that's how they got their social news out there. Instead of posting it on Instagram, they told the local newspaper. People aren't doing that as much because they're just posting that on social media, and that's fine and that's great. But as I always say, what happens if Instagram crashes? What happens if somebody hacks your personal account and deletes all your pictures? But the newspaper is the permanent record of the county. It's the permanent record of your life if you choose to let it be. And even if our building were to be destroyed by fire, we've still got microfilm in our libraries of what's been published in our paper. It's always going to be there. So social media is great, and we use social media newspaper for things. But I think the newspaper is also still so important. I think that it will depend on how long society wants to continue reading a printed version of a newspaper. And I think that also goes back to printed copies of books. You can still read a book online, but many people are still choosing to actually physically hold that book. So I think as long as there's a generation who still wants to hold that book, I think that there will still be printed newspapers. Do I foresee that they will eventually no longer be actual papers? Yes, I think there will be a time in history where there will no longer be printed newspapers. I don't foresee that happening in my lifetime, but it could. As long as there is a generation who lived before the existence of the internet or the popularity of internet news organizations, I think that there's always going to be the need for the printed version in some form. A weekly newspaper is certainly different than a daily. Weeklies, people seem to want the printed version of that more because a community newspaper covers news in a different way. I think dailies more and more are strictly going to online, or the majority of their subscribers are online, because that is something that you can get daily on the internet, whereas a community newspaper is not going to offer you the same thing that you can get online every day. I think that we are learning to exist in the times in which we live in. In a post-COVID world, things are changing so quickly, and we're all seeing that. We're seeing that with not just advertising and stories, but just life in general is changing, and the way that people are relying on other ways to get their news. And that's why I say that we've got to continue to find ways to offer them things that they cannot get other places. And that's why I focus a lot on local news about local people that they're not going to read anywhere else. They may get the basketball scores from the internet, but they're not going to get that feature story on that player who just broke that scoring record. They're not going to get the feature story about the lady who's 90-something years old and has been making baskets her whole life. That type of thing, they're not going to get that. And that's what I think is so important for community newspapers to focus on. Is I always say that daily newspapers or big newspapers, they may focus on when you were born and your obituary when you die, but community newspapers are responsible for the dates in between. When you win an award, when you get married, when you have a baby, those kind of things, that's our role. And I think right now, even though things are different, I still think that our readers are still looking for us for that type of thing.